So the first paper is by Jose de Candeias Sales, who is a full professor in the Universidade Alberta and I do apologize, and a researcher in the Center for History of the University of Lisbon and a member of the Centro de Estudos Globais of the Universidade Alberta. He is an ancient historian and Egyptologist, having published many books and articles, both in Portugal and abroad. I do apologize for my pronunciation. And he is joined by Susana Mota, who is a researcher in the Centro de Estudos Globais of the Universidade Aberta. She has pursued Egyptological research since 2006, and from 2016 onwards has dedicated herself to researching in the field of ancient Egyptian reception, Egyptomania, and the field of the history of communication. So I will hand over to our two speakers now, who will proceed with their paper. Again, we will save all questions for our speakers until all three papers are done. So thank you very much. Over to you, Jose and Susana.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. We would like to start. We would like to start by thanking you for the opportunity to presenting some of the data resulting for our research project. When in 2016 we started the research project entitled Tutankhamon em Portugal, Relatos na Imprensa Portuguesa 1922-1939, Tutankhamun in Portugal, Reports in the Portuguese Press 1922-1939, our intention was to study how the Portuguese press reported the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Portugal was in the early 20th century a country with no direct connection with any archaeological work in Egypt. In addition, the national press was dominated by the political reality of the time, being the newspaper themselves openly doctrinary. Still, the Republican regime was very conducive to the development of the press to the point that it was affirmed that Portugal was then a country of newspapers. Thus, it was our goal to understand whether even in this particular reality, this great archaeological discovery had an impact on the Portuguese press, and in what way and how intensely the news items was made public. The chronological beacons of the research are the years of 1922, the year of the discovery, and 1939, the year that marks simultaneously the death of Howard Carter and the discovery of other intact Egyptian royal tombs in Tanis, Eastern Delta, by the French archaeologist Pierre Montet. Our sources were the newspapers and magazine published in Portugal during the 17 years that run from 1922 to 1939. Through the specialized bibliography on the Portuguese press, it was possible to identify for this defined period 78 titles, 58 newspapers, and 21 magazines, and the consultation of these titles led us to identification of 28 publications in which were identified new items, news items related to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb and the several events associated with it. A total of 234 news items and articles.
From the systematization of the available data, we noticed that the year with the highest number of news is 1923, with 170 news, followed by 1924 with 94 news. In these 2 years, we found 211 of the 234 news items collected. That is 90% of the total. This overwhelming preponderance is fully justified by the fact that these 2 years are the ones with the highest number of facts surrounding the discovery. 1923 is the year of the official opening of the tomb and the death of Lord Carnarvon, and 1924 the work in the tomb continues, and the problems that occurred between Howard Carter and the Egyptian government surrounding the continuation of the operation of the excavation work stands out. The year of 1939, which closes our chronology, appears in third place, albeit with only 10 news, all dedicated or to the death of Howard Carter or to the new discoveries that occurred in Tanis. We think that as important as the presence are the absences. We should mention 2 absences. The first, in 1922, the year of the discovery of the tomb, of which we only have 1 text, this one in the image. The second absence happens in 1925, the year in which the most iconic piece of Tutankhamun tomb was found, the funerary mask of the pharaoh. In this year, only 9 news were published in Portugal. None of this is related to the mask, which means that no news was published in the Portuguese press that alludes to this discovery, or that presents an image of the famous mask of Tutankhamun to the Portuguese readers. Let us now look at the characteristics of the collected news. It's easy to conceive that the 234 news published did not all have the same characteristics, nor did they deserve exactly the same journalistic approach. Compiling and observing closely the characteristics of all this data, we established with our own labels 8 great typologies of news. The different typologies allow us to perceive that we are dealing with a set of texts and images of different natures and with different origins. However, this is also highlights the fact that most of the news is not original, or at least written entirely in its own original form by journalists or reporters of the national publications. That is, much attention was paid by the Portuguese press to the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. However, what was published is essentially the result of news sent from abroad via news agencies, or are copies or adaptations of news from foreign newspapers, more specifically French newspapers. Resulting from what comes from outside can be seen as a disinterest on the subject. Such an hypothesis is contradicted by the space that the publications gave to it. It seems make more sense to think that those who wrote in the Portuguese press of the time, a press that was mostly centered on political themes and mainly focused on the national politics, might have not felt that they had enough information and knowledge to address the subject and to do an in-depth research on it. It is therefore clear that despite living one of the most troubled political and social periods in its history, and although its numerous newspapers and magazines were essentially mainly devoted to the political intervention, Portugal did not escape the interest that the discovery and the excavation of the tomb of Tutankhamun stimulated all over the world.
Embarking on this worldwide movement, the Portuguese press reported the most varied questions about what was happening in Egypt. However, what was more intensively published and explored focused on the 3 essential aspects, such as the historical knowledge and learnings that stem from the discovery, that what we labeled as know the past, the patrimonial and artistic value of the findings, what we labeled cherish the past, and the question of the curse of the mummy, of the revenge of the pharaoh, that will be the cause of the premature death of Lord Carnarvon, what we labeled as fear the past. Let us look at these issues in more detail. The first set of news, know the past, dedicated to the historical knowledge and learnings that stem from the discovery, is exemplified by the text from the newspaper A Capital, on the 30th of January of 1923, even before the official opening of the tomb, this newspaper published a text, a full copy of an original from the French newspaper Excelsior, which content seemed so relevant that it was also published by two other Portuguese newspapers, O Comércio do Porto, Edição da Tarde, and Correio da Manhã. The text, entitled The Excavations of Luxor, the whole history of Egypt will be revealed, the holy books in the face of reality, had as its main purpose to demonstrate that the rolls of papyri discovered in the tomb, still to be deciphered, will help to fill the gaps in the history of ancient Egypt. Curiously, it becomes clear throughout the text that rather than only discovering the history of ancient Egypt, there was a great interest in its relation to the history of the Hebrew people, and there was even the chance that the discovery helped to clarify the date of the Exodus and to validate the Pentateuch narratives. These texts presenting the amazing discoveries from the tomb as precisely contributions for the elucidation of legendary and enigmatic events from ancient history and the relation of the Egyptian history to biblical history values.
The second category of news emphasizes the patrimonial riches found in the tomb, highlighting its artistic significance. The patrimonial and artistic value of the findings were highly valued, not only focusing on the material wealth and the associated luxury, but mainly emphasizing the beauty and the quality of the pieces of art that were becoming known. As the testimony of this interest, we point out three examples of many possible ones, since they are the most illustrative of two different approaches to this topic. The news published by Diário de Lisboa stands out for the richness of the text and for the way the discovery was described. An original text written by Joaquim Gomes Monteiro, a Portuguese writer, journalist, and essayist, that in a very eloquent way praises and values Egypt in general and the tomb of Tutankhamun in particular. The text may be divided in three parts. In the first one, the author expresses appreciation for the archaeological findings and for the labor of English researchers. The second one aims mainly to enumerate for the reader's enjoyment the magnificent objects found in the tomb. The third and last part emphasizes that the discovery made until then had happened only in the antechamber of the tomb, then aims to excite the public and sustain their attention for the continuation of the excavation works. The author produces an informative and appreciative text about the discovery, capable of fascinating its reader by the beauties produced by the ancient Egyptians, brought into the public knowledge by archaeology. The Egyptian artistic riches are more valued for their civilizational dimension than from their material significance. In a different register, we have two news from the magazine Ilustração Portuguesa, one from March from 1923 and another from January 1924. By the profusion of images published, allow the Portuguese readers to see and not only to imagine the riches of the tomb of Tutankhamun. These two news consist essentially in images, 13 in the news from 1923 and 7 from the news from 1924. The text in this news was only used as a background to the photos they accompanied. Nevertheless, they deserve to be mentioned due to the way they emphasize their value and beauty. By comparison with other stories about the tomb's artistic riches, the great virtue of these two numbers of Ilustração Portuguesa is that they provide an opportunity to see images of the numerous pieces of Tutankhamun treasure effectively giving Portuguese readers a direct observation of the extent and beauty of those pieces.
The principal new titles, item titles, especially following the 5th of April of 1923, the date of the death of Lord Carnarvon, was The Revenge of the Mummy or The Revenge of Tutankhamun, the third category of news that we label as Fear the Pest. This topic of guaranteed success to the general public was used in large scale by the Portuguese press. Examples of these include the news items headlines that are revealing of the will to draw public attention to a magical and a superstitious dimension supposedly associated with ancient Egyptian religion. These obvious sensationalistic headlines systematically resort the expressions like threat, revenge, mystery, black magic, superstition, profanation, and desecrators that under an innocuous and informative appearance transmit the judgments of value that help to shape the reader's perspective on the ancient Egyptian civilization. Egypt was displayed as the context of a primitive religiosity impregnated with mysteries and black magic so powerful that was able to overtake the limits of time to punish those who disturbed the dead, the eternal rest of a pharaoh. No matter who the victim was, the pharaoh revenge was implacable and infallible. Portuguese newspapers promoted the sensational idea that a curse had struck down Lord Carnarvon along with a plethora of other intellectuals, journalists, and visitors. Curiously, Howard Carter, the finder of the tomb, the person who more than anybody dared to disturb and challenge Tutankhamun, lived another 17 years, 10 of which he spent working on the tomb, and died in 1939 at the age of 65.
Well, first of all, we must say that it was quite difficult for us to summarize the main ideas that arose from our investigation that we started 6 years ago in a 15 minutes presentation, where in the last year we are used to give about 2 hours conference, and even so much remains unsaid. Nevertheless, we quickly realized that although Portugal was not at the time a country with Egyptological experience and tradition, and that it was going through one of the most troubled political and social periods in its history, the Portuguese press not only did not ignore the subject, but on the contrary, they give it a place of prominence in its pages, mainly during the years of 1923 and 24. In Portugal, the richness of Egyptian history, its artistic wealth, and the mysterious and superstitious religion associated with this civilization were widely reported and thus actively contributed to the reader's perception of ancient Egyptian people, their history, and their culture. So, in our country, we may say that Tutankhamun was a means by which the civilization of ancient Egypt became closer, more present, and that was manifested, for example, in poetry, in literature, and even in interior decoration. Thank you so much.